What we're going to find as we read the book of Jeremiah is that there's a lot of quite difficult stuff to get our heads around. As is the case with a lot of the prophets, they talk a lot about judgment and they talk a lot about Israel being punished. And as we read that, and because we're just going through a phase of reading that at the moment, it can seem very unjustified, the sort of punishment that God deals out to Israel. So in order to understand it, we have to understand the background of what's happening, the bigger story, as it were. And the story is one of covenant. And a covenant is a massive theme in the Bible. The Old Testament and the New Testament, the word testament just means covenant. So it's Old Covenant, New Covenant. And in the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, there are different pictures of covenant. But one picture is a picture of marriage. And it's this idea that God takes Israel as his bride, really, as his covenant partner. They make the covenant of marriage together, where God says, I'll be faithful to you, and I'll bless you and I'll watch over you. And in exchange, in return, I want you to do likewise. I want you to be faithful to me. And so in practice, what that meant is worship me as your only God and don't have all these other gods, and also behave in a way that I expect my bride to behave. And the language that's being used here in Jeremiah shows you something of the way in which Israel have failed to do that. So he says right at the start, does a young woman forget her jewellery, a bride her wedding ornaments? No, because you never forget anything that precious, and yet you have forgotten me. And then slightly later on in verse 1 of chapter 3, it says, you have lived as a prostitute with many lovers. Would you now return to me, declares the Lord. Israel as a people have had affairs. They've committed adultery. Can you imagine if a couple of friends of yours got married and then within a few weeks she was having an affair? And she had another one, and another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. And he kept forgiving and forgiving and forgiving, but she just wouldn't stop having these affairs. Sooner or later, you'd have to say, this relationship is completely broken. And that's what God is doing here. And so a little later on, verse 8, I gave Israel, faithless Israel, her certificate of divorce, and I sent her away because of all her adulteries. And he refers to Israel and Judah at this point because they've split in two, the people of Israel. And so there's a kingdom of Israel and there's a kingdom of Judah, but they've both been unfaithful. Again, look, the verse 20 of chapter 3. But like a woman unfaithful to her husband, so you, Israel, have been unfaithful to me. And that hurt and that pain that God feels is the reason why he is turning his back on Israel. So as we're going to see over the next days and weeks of reading Jeremiah, it's going to be difficult stuff. That's the context. They have had affairs and they've betrayed the husband who's been faithful and loving to them all this time.